deadly attack near a resort in Cancun, Mexico. 2 were shot dead in a confrontation between rival gangs, sending tourists running from the beach to escape.
November 4th, 2012. Gunfire would break the paradise of Mexico's Riviera Maya as rival gangs opened fire at a beachfront resort, killing 2 cartel members. However, this horrific act would uncover a brutal payback, unexpected alliances, and gang wars the cartels never saw coming.
They requested government intervention to put an end to the violence plaguing southern Mexico.
The truth is, we feel helpless in our hearts as a community.
On June 25, 2024, near La Concordia, Chiapas, a dump truck that had been abandoned off a quiet dirt road was discovered by locals, and to their greatest surprise, they were met with something far worse than silence: bodies. At least 19 of them slumped in the truck bed, others dumped nearby like trash, twisted, bloodied, left to rot in the sun. It was the latest and perhaps most gruesome reminder that southern Mexico has become a full-blown war zone yet again. Authorities believe the victims were caught in an escalating conflict between the Sinaloa cartel and a rising local faction that's come to be known as the Chiapas Guatemala Gang, a loose but deadly alliance of local gunmen, ex-cops, and Guatemalan smugglers. And while Sinaloa may be one of the most powerful cartels in the world, they're learning quickly that this corner of Mexico won't be taken easily. For decades, Chiapas was a quiet corridor, mostly used to move drugs, arms, and migrants through to the U.S. However, with pressure mounting up north, Sinaloa pushed south in 2023, looking to dominate the border routes and cash in on the booming migrant smuggling trade in towns like Frontera con Malapa, Chico Muselo, and Motozinla. And this had made these places battlegrounds. Local communities fed up with extortion and cartel takeover either fought back directly or aligned with rival criminal factions. Some would join forces with the so-called Chiapas Guatemala group, not because they were saints, but because they were their criminals, not outsiders. More like cartel warfare blended with a kind of territorial resistance. So the turning point comes on October 1st, 2023, when Sinaloa sicarios try to take Frontera con Malapa by force. They're met with burning barricades, armed locals, and a deadly firefight that left at least 10 dead, including town officials and suspected militia members. Now, Chiapas is bleeding, and thousands of people have fled. The federal government has deployed over 1,200 troops to the border, yet massacres like the one on June 25th keep happening, and ambushes, convoys, and even drone surveillance have become regular sightings. The Sinaloa cartel came south expecting easy gains. Instead, they ran into a war they can't control, one that's fueled by local rage, corruption, and decades of buried tension.
¿Qué preparamos los niños aquí en Ayahualtem? Porque pues cada 3 días, 4 días están amenazando al grupo delictivo de entrar en la comunidad de Ayahualtem.
April 2021. Tucked away in the low mountains of Guerrero, in a quiet Nahua village, something dark was creeping in. Los Ardillos, a ruthless criminal group tied to the Red Cartel and El Rojos, had been kidnapping locals, threatening families, and demanding protection money. Since 2019, 9 civilians have been murdered, including community police officers. In one brutal incident, 10 musicians were shot and burnt en route to a concert. Los Ardillos were tightening their grip on the territory, and Ayahualtempa was one of the last holdouts refusing to fold. Los Ardillos had already left a bloody trail by burning down vehicles, kidnapping farmers, and extorting anyone trying to make an honest living, whether it's selling corn or moving supplies down a dirt road. However, the town hits its breaking point. As the cartel's threats were growing by the day, they would start begging the federal government to send in some troops. They knew they couldn't keep holding the line alone. But with no help coming from police or state forces, the villagers had to make a desperate and shocking decision. They formed their own community police, called the CRAC-PF. This is a volunteer group made up of locals who had no military training, and most shocking was that there's children here, as young as 6 years old, armed, to patrol their fields and mountain roads, and most of them didn't have real guns. Some carried real rifles, while others had these wooden toy guns, but their message was simple.
We're ready to defend ourselves.
Many of them had lost their fathers to violence, and now they're stepping up to protect what was left.
They say they faced constant threats from the local drug cartel, known as Los Ardillos, which is trying to take control of the territory. There's a long history in Mexico of communities that feel abandoned.
One village elder put it simply:
We don't want our kids fighting. We also don't want them getting kidnapped or killed.
Today, the CRA-CPF still man checkpoints at the town's edge, with volunteers and their rifles keeping watch over schoolyards and winding paths. The kids don't shoot because they're not meant to. However, they're visible, and their visibility matters. Ayahualtempa isn't some covert task force with satellite gear and foreign funding. We don't have black SUVs or CIA briefcases around here. Just everyday people, man. Farmers, single mothers, retired teachers that decided to stand their ground against cartel terror. Respect. And they've drawn their line in the dirt.
As vacationers were enjoying the beach, many of them were Americans, and investigators say as many as 15 armed men arrived on boats just before that shootout erupted.
The 4th of November, 2021 was just another afternoon in paradise until a boat pulls up to the beach and masked gunmen jump out with their assault rifles. Tourists lounging near the Hyatt Ziva Riviera Cancun and Azul Beach Resort went from playing volleyball to running for their lives. Vacationers were diving behind pool chairs, hiding in the kitchens, scrambling throughout the hotel lobbies as commando units of cartel gunmen stormed ashore. According to authorities, about 15 armed men in ski masks landed on the shore and just opened fire because they got information that CJNG drug dealers had shown up earlier that day, claiming the beach was now their turf. And as a result of the shooting, 2 of the newcomers, one right there on the sand and the other just steps inside the hotel, were executed. An innocent bystander was injured. Whether it was a hotel worker or a guest, no one could say for sure. The shooters quickly fled the way they came, vanishing into the Caribbean in their boat.
But at the same time, it's quite a busy area, quite populated.
For many tourists, this is pure terror. Guests had barricaded themselves in hotel rooms. This is the latest in a series of bloody cartel clashes turning Mexico's Riviera Maya into a war zone. Prosecutors say groups aligned with the Jalisco New Generation cartel and others connected to the Gulf cartel are battling for control of street-level drug sales in tourist hotspots like Cancun, Tulum, and Playa del Carmen. And just 2 weeks earlier, Californian travel blogger and a German tourist were killed in a crossfire shootout at a Tulum restaurant. 3 other tourists from Germany and the Netherlands were also hit. And back in June, 2 more bodies turned up on Tulum's beach. I mean, the truth is, the violence has been building for months. In Playa del Carmen, a policewoman was shot, stuffed in a car trunk, and dumped. Days later, cops raided the city's main tourist drag, detaining 26 suspects in connection with drug trafficking and extortion. And as cartels fight for every inch of beach access and resort-adjacent territory, Quintana Roo's glittering coast has become ground zero for a different kind of turf war. On May 25, 2022, somewhere deep in the jungle along the Colombia-Ecuador border, 2 Mexican nationals were found dead. Locals said that they weren't tourists. They were cartel envoys sent by the CJNG to finalize a new cocaine deal. Instead, they were ambushed and executed by men in military fatigues who didn't work for the government. After Colombia's 2016 peace deal, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, officially disbanded. But not everyone laid down arms. A wave of dissident factions still well-armed and deeply connected to the drug trade took over former zones, especially in border departments like Putumayo, Nariño, and Caquetá. These groups weren't ideological anymore. They're full-blown narco armies. Around 2021, CJNG sent operatives into Colombia to flush with money, seeking direct access to in production zones. Their goal was to cut out the middleman, buy directly from producers, and move shipments throughout Ecuadorian ports. But in Colombia's jungle, you don't show up uninvited. FARC dissidents, especially Frente Carolina Ramirez and Segunda Marquetalia, saw CJNG as a threat, not just to their business, but to their dominance. They didn't want Mexican cartels setting prices, controlling routes, or even taking over local alliances. So, after a failed negotiation attempt in Puerto Asís, 2 CJNG operatives went missing. Days later, their bodies surfaced riddled with bullets, dumped on a jungle path with a note signed by FARC EP saying,
"This is Colombia. Respect it."
The killing set off a panic behind the scenes. CJNG quietly pulled back its operatives from southern Colombia. Sources close to Colombia intel suggested that the CJNG tried to regroup in Ecuador and move operations north, avoiding direct confrontation with the dissidents. Now, this is a rare moment where where CJNG, known for its aggression, gets pushed back. Colombian factions don't fear them. These weren't rival cartels fighting over turf. They're homegrown militias who'd been fighting wars since before the CJNG even existed, and they're not about to hand over their jungle routes to any foreign player.
Murders happened at the height of the drug war when Juarez saw more than 3,000 homicides, date the deadliest year in our sister city. Murders that claimed the lives of people in March of 2010.
March 13th, 2010. An SUV's ambushed in broad daylight just blocks from the Santa Fe International Bridge with 3 people, a U.S. consulate worker, her husband, and a third man linked to the consulate, all murdered. At first, it appeared to be a cartel message to the U.S., but as investigators dug deeper, they found something more specific. Barrio Azteca was behind the hit, and they believed the targets had links to the Sinaloa cartel. This was the height of the Juarez cartel war, one of the deadliest conflicts Mexico had ever seen, and the 2 main players dominating the battlefield are the Juarez cartel, clinging control of drug corridors into El Paso, and the Sinaloa cartel, just trying to take that. Barrio Azteca, a brutal gang born in Texas prisons and recruited by the Juarez cartel as their street-level muscle, was caught in the middle and fully weaponized, a hyper-violent prison gang born in El Paso but operating heavily in Juarez. Though originally independent, they aligned with the Juarez cartel and became its enforcers. So when Sinaloa began making gains in Juarez around 2008, Barrio Azteca wasn't having this. They set up execution teams, marked houses, and conducted surveillance from apartments. They aimed to keep El Chapo's people out or kill them if they showed up. So anyone tied to Sinaloa risked being gunned down. One captured Sicario even bragged about killing 800 people in 2009 alone, saying teams had a daily quota, 8 kills per day. Thousands of people had died in the battle for Juarez, and many of those killings were tied to Barrio Azteca's war against Sinaloa. Bodies were hung from bridges, and people's body parts were found in garbage bags. But still, the cartel tried to outgun a gang that already knew the streets, the prisons, and the politics better than anyone else. Now, the consulate murders changed everything. When U.S. citizens were caught in the crossfire, federal heat exploded. Back in 2011, the FBI and DEA finally pulled the curtain back on a massive case. 35 Barrio Azteca members were charged, including Eduardo Ravelo, who made it to the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Now, he's believed to be the link between the gang and Juarez cartel brass, charging him with murder, racketeering, and drug trafficking. Sinaloa eventually gained the upper hand in Juarez. The cost was staggering, and Barrio Azteca made sure they bled for every block. What started as a turf war became a global incident.
Now to the inside story of 2 Chicago brothers who turned on El Chapo, helping make today's conviction possible. They did it on the watch of Jack Riley, who once headed the Drug Enforcement Administration.
February 14th, 2013. The Chicago Crime Commission held a press conference and dusted off a label they hadn't used in over 80 years. Public Enemy Number 1. The last people to get that name was either Al Capone or Alvin Creepy Karpis, but now it's being handed to someone who had probably never even set foot in Chicago. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, head of the Sinaloa cartel. So the announcement isn't just symbolic, it's a wake-up call, because behind the scenes, the feds had been piecing together how deeply El Chapo's network had embedded itself into Chicago's drug scene. And they weren't doing it alone. They had help. A lot of it. One of the key links was a street gang with deep roots into Chi-Town's South Side. For years, they were one of the most influential gangs that ran local corners, until the Sinaloa cartel started backing them. Then they began moving heroin, cocaine, and meth on a much bigger scale throughout Chicago and into surrounding states. They're known as gangster disciples. Still, the whole operation may have stayed hidden a while longer if not for Pedro and Margarito Flores, the twin brothers from Chicago who were acting as direct middlemen between El Chapo's crew and U.S. distributors, including the GDs. The drug world was getting messier by the day, and shootouts were becoming more frequent. Rivals are dropping like flies, and the feds were closing in hard on major players in the U.S. Even the DEA had already started poking around Chicago. Pedro and Margarito could feel the heat. They knew it was only a matter of time before they were either behind bars or 6 feet under. And they had a lot to lose.
Twin brothers from Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, Pedro and Margarito Flores, were El Chapo's biggest distributors here in the Midwest. They used stash houses in the suburbs and modified vehicles.
They were married, had some families to protect, and all they'd gained from their millionaire-level dealing. One big buck bust could just take it away, especially their kids. But that wasn't all. They were stuck in the middle of a deadly split, as the Sinaloa cartel was breaking ties with the Beltran Leyva organization, and they were doing business with both. So they had the option of picking a side and one or the other might come for your head, or stay neutral, and you risk of being seen as a traitor by both. So they made a move that shocked everyone.
We're El Chapo's biggest distributors here in the Midwest. They use stash houses in the suburbs and modified vehicles to keep the pipeline of drugs flowing from Mexico to Chicago.
In 2008, while still working directly under El Chapo, the twins reach out to U.S. authorities and quietly turn themselves in, cooperating and spilling everything. Wiretaps, secret recordings, ledgers, all pointed to a massive pipeline of drugs running from Mexico through Sinaloa contacts in the Midwest and straight into the hands of Chicago gangs. They started recording phone calls, handing over routes, logistics, names, everything, and literally opened up the Sinaloa cartel's operations like a map. Now, they gave them a huge advantage, giving them lighter sentences instead of facing life in prison, considering they were moving massive quantities of cocaine and heroin every month. In the end, their cooperation helped authorities arrest El Chapo in 2014, and their testimony played a big role in convicting him in 2019. After serving their time, the twins disappeared into witness protection. These guys had built a legacy for themselves, and now they're seen as two of the most significant cartel informants in U.S. history, and also one of the biggest betrayals ever recorded.
El Cártel Santa Rosa de Lima, una de las organizaciones del narcotráfico más violentas de México.
On July 1st, 2020, in Irapuato, Guanajuato, gunmen would burst into a drug rehab center and open fire. 27 people are killed, their bodies left slumped in chairs and on the floor. It was one of the deadliest attacks Mexico saw that year, and surprisingly, it wasn't even about drugs. For years, the Santa Rosa de Lima gang had been tapping into Pemex pipelines like it was their personal ATM. Stolen gasoline, known locally as huachicoleo. These guys weren't a nationwide powerhouse. They're locals, ruthless, and smart, led by Jose Antonio El Mato Yepes. The gang started off by cutting locals in on the fuel theft and just built loyalty. They ruled towns like Celaya, Salamanca, and Irapuato with a mix of handouts and terror. The real trouble started when the CJNG just rolled in, trying to take over Guanajuato. They showed up with convoys, grenade launchers, armored trucks, and a message:
join us or die.
Most groups would have folded, but El Mato didn't just fight back. He went to war. His men had kidnapped CJNG operatives, torched gas tankers, and even dropped a video of cartel members forcing CJNG suspects to eat cartel banners before killing them. Guanajuato quickly became a war zone. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Cops were executed in broad daylight. By March 2019, over 100 people are killed in a single month. And then came July 2020, one of the bloodiest flashpoints. While nobody claimed it outright, most fingers pointed at Santa Rosa, passing a message to anyone helping CJNG.
You're not safe anywhere.
El Mato held out longer than anyone expected. He knew the land, had loyalists, and dirt on just about every official in the region. But eventually the walls closed in. In August 2020, he was finally captured by Mexican forces. Still, his arrest didn't end the violence. His father and brother started fighting for control, while CJNG pushed deeper into Guanajuato. The state remains contested because what started as a gasoline racket turned into one of the most vicious cartel battles in modern Mexican history.
A group of armed vigilantes is trading machine gun fire with members of the Knights Templar cartel.
On February 8, 2014, an armed civilian militia led to a coordinated attack into Apatzingan, the Knights Templar cartel's home base, torching safe houses and reclaiming the city. Federal forces later moved in for support and formally integrate them. Now, they weren't soldiers, but they looked like them with their sandbags, reinforced old pickup trucks with rifles sticking out of the windows, and guys in mismatched gear, some in work boots, others in camo. Just a group of regular guys who'd had enough. These were the autodefensas, a self-defense group, Grupo de Autodefensa, born out of desperation in 2013. For years, the Knights Templar ruled Michoacan like it was their own kingdom. They weren't just moving drugs. They preyed on communities as they would control, extort, and kidnap small business owners, shaking down taco vendors and school teachers for protection money, keeping women and girls, and being a major exporter of crystal meth into the U.S. In the liberated towns, residents revealed how far the Knights had dominated their lives. Farmers of avocados and limes had to pay a quota for every kilo they produced. Corn growers were forced to sell their maize cheaply to the criminals, who would then sell it at a double price to tortilla makers. People who owed them money had to give over their homes to the cartel, who would bring notaries to sign over those titles. Oh, those who stood against the cartel risked being tortured, sometimes publicly, or you'd lose your head, literally, and the government wouldn't help. In towns like Tepalcatepec, La Aduana, and Buena Vista, farmers, ranchers, mechanics, and ex-soldiers grabbed whatever weapons they could and just started organizing themselves, setting up roadblocks and patrolling their streets. And because they're all by themselves, they take control where the state had failed. The center of all this was an unexpected leader, Jose Manuel Mireles, a tall, mustached doctor with a calm voice, a physician turned rebel, appearing on TV in a white lab coat one day and then in combat gear the next, calling on locals to rise. They didn't ask for permission. They just decided that
if the government won't protect us, we'll do it ourselves.
With Mireles at the front, the autodefensas swept through town after town, pushing out cartel foot soldiers, raiding stash houses, and even arresting corrupt cops. Mireles wasn't just a figurehead, man. The autodefensas had captured Nueva Italia, becoming symbolic, pushing the Knights Templar out of the town, reportedly killing several sicarios and dismantling safe houses. These guys were beasts, and their cheering as cartel graffiti was painted over, and banners with the words Fuera Templarios, Templars out, were hung on city buildings. The deeper they pushed into cartel territory, the more organized they became. They built checkpoints, ran their own patrols, and coordinated with nearby towns, and support was growing. On that February morning, the autodefensas moved into Apatzingan, one of the most heavily guarded cartel strongholds, where they had some gunfights in the streets. The Templarios were shocked. The cartel was weakened, but not eliminated. In the vacuum, though, the CJNG moved in, and the cycle of violence began all over again. But in the end, the autodefensas did what the state couldn't. They stood up and fought back. We go back to January 30th, 1993, in Colombia. 4 bodies were burning in a junkyard on the outskirts of Medellin, each one with a bullet to the head and a cardboard sign stapled to the chest.
For Pablo.
The groups behind it didn't bother hiding. They signed every message the same way: Los Pepes.
Los Pepes was a bunch of people who been affected by Pablo Escobar in any way. People who became his enemy, police people who Pablo want to kill.
Now, the name of this group is short for Perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Los Pepes wasn't a traditional gang nor a rival cartel. It was a loose alliance of people who had lost family to Pablo Escobar's violence, ex-Medellin cartel members, rivals from the Cali cartel, former paramilitaries, and even a few rogue cops and soldiers, with one goal: to make Escobar bleed. In July 1992, Escobar was already on the run. He'd escaped his self-made prison, La Catedral, and was being hunted by Colombia's elite search block unit with U.S. support. However, Los Pepes weren't interested in arresting him. They wanted revenge, and they didn't care who got caught in the crossfire.
12 died and more than 200 passers-by were injured in this recent explosion. Another outrage was to follow. This time, there was no mistaking the culprit's identity. They'd left their signature at the scene.
Within weeks, Los Pepes began hitting Escobar where it hurt most: his soldiers, his family, his money men. They would blow up his properties, kidnap his relatives, and assassinate his accountants in broad daylight. Even Escobar's lawyer was found dead, some burnt beyond recognition. As Escobar's empire started crumbling piece by piece, people started accusing the U.S. intelligence and Colombian police of turning a blind eye and feeding intel to Los Pepes just because they were getting results and ruining Escobar's once untouchable empire. Those safe houses were no longer feeling safe for his people. Bankers stopped answering calls, and his loyal men defected in droves. In December 1992, their first known victim was Velasco, one of Escobar's key foot soldiers. And then on Christmas Day, they staged one of their most twisted warnings yet. They ripped apart sicarios and tied them to walls with Christmas lights, blood and all, like some macabre holiday display. Attached were notes addressed to Escobar. Oh, the plan worked. Escobar was getting more paranoid by the day and constantly on the move, using fewer phones and cutting ties with almost everyone. Every time he reached out, someone close to him died. Things got so bad that his own family even tried to flee Colombia. They eventually made it out, only after his death. By December 2nd, 1993, just one day after his 44th birthday, he'd been on the run for 16 months, and less than a year since Los Pepes started hunting him, he and his trusted bodyguard, Álvaro de Jesus Agudelo, aka El Limón, were held up in what seemed like an unlikely spot, right in Escobar's old neighborhood in Medellin. Maybe they thought no one would expect him to be hiding that close to home, but the search block in Los Pepes were closing in, and fast. They'd finally traced him after he stayed on a phone call longer than usual. One of the officers spotted a man in a second-story window of a row house. Although he looked rough with long hair, thick beard, and definitely not the polished Pablo Escobar from the wanted posters, they were sure it was him. And as the team moved in, El Limón tried to make a run as he climbs out the window, drops onto a lower roof, but is shot multiple times before he can hit ground. Escobar follows, carrying 2 pistols, one of them a Sig Sauer he'd famously handed over during a failed peace deal in 1991. He didn't make it far, and he was hit 3 times, once in the leg, upper back, and one behind the ear. Both men died on that rooftop. The part of who pulled that trigger is still a debate, as officially, it was the search block, with Hugo Aguilar even stepping forward to take credit. However, Diego Don Berna Murillo from Los Pepes claimed that his own brother delivered the final shot, and a lot of people still believe that it was Los Pepes, not the cops, who truly finished Escobar off. Los Pepes didn't just fight him, they became a mirror of the violence he created, and they used it to destroy him. On April 4th, 1993, Los Pepes announced they were done. In a public statement, they said they were packing up and going home. Mission accomplished.
Authorities investigate the cause of the violence. Security experts blame it, at least in part, on a feud between rival drug gangs.
October 16th, 2016. That Sunday evening at Monte Cristo prison in Roraima, Brazil, tensions between rival factions boiled over and quickly turned into one of the deadliest prison riots in Brazil's history, with records of over 25 inmates dead, some with their bodies ripped apart and their heads taken off. That night, members of Brazil's Primeiro Comando de Capital, PCC, launch a coordinated strike against their former allies, now enemies, the Comando Vermelho, CV, or Red Command. By morning, body parts are lining the prison floor, heads are stacked like trophies, and that was enough of a sign that their alliance was over. For years, these two groups had dominated Brazil's criminal underworld altogether. The Red Command ran Rio, the PCC controlled Sao Paulo. Together, they shared drug routes, prison networks, and an empire that stretched from the Amazon to West Africa and Europe. But by late 2016, cracks had started to show. The Red Command made deals behind the PCC's back, tried muscling in on Colombian suppliers, and moved into Amazonian territory, which is a move the PCC took as betrayal. So the PCC hits first in Monte Cristo, and then again in January 2017 in Manaus, Natal, and Boa Vista, unleashing a wave of prison massacres that left over 130 inmates dead in a matter of days. The country was stunned. Brazil's prison system had become the battlefield in a drug civil war. So the fallout was massive. PCC was surging into power, taking over key trafficking corridors in northern Brazil, pushing into Bolivia and Paraguay, and forming alliances with international groups like Tren de Aragua, and even alleged links to Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the Red Command lost ground, but didn't disappear. In fact, they've since clawed back territory, especially in Rio, where they remain deeply rooted in favela communities. So what started as a prison fight quickly exploded into a nationwide war for dominance, with military-style weapons, alliance across continents, and operations in Portugal, Colombia, and beyond. The PCC and Red Command weren't just gangs, but global players, and the breakup of their alliance turned them into each other's worst enemies. In Brazil's underworld, the wrong handshake can lead to a bloodbath, and in 2016, the Red Command learned that the hard way. This wasn't just a drug beef, it was a full-blown war between two criminal empires, and the Red Command picked a fight that they weren't prepared for. In the end, they didn't just lose bodies, they lost control.